James Mitchell returned early from his Silicon Valley business trip, the key turning in the lock of his Beverly Hills mansion with a familiar click. The house stood quiet, too quiet as his Italian leather shoes echoed across the marble foyer. Something felt wrong. A vase slightly askew, a handprint on the otherwise immaculate wall, the scent of fear hanging in the air like an unwelcome guest. His heart quickened as he noticed the nursery door ajar, soft, whimpering sounds escaping from within. James pushed it open, and the world around him shattered. There was Miguel Hernandez, their Ecuadorian house manager with nursing credentials, bound cruelly to the headboard, his wrists raw and bleeding. Against his chest lay the twin babies James and Charles had welcomed through surrogacy just 6 months ago, their miracle children after 3 failed attempts. "Miguel," James whispered, his voice barely audible as the briefcase slipped from his fingers and crashed to the floor. Miguel's eyes widened with fear and shame. "Mr. Mitchell, please," he whispered, desperately trying to quiet the stirring infants. "I didn't want to wake them." James rushed forward, his mind racing through impossible explanations. The elegant nursery with its hand-painted clouds and imported furniture now felt like a crime scene. Family photos smiled down from shelves James and Charles at their wedding, the perfect couple for their affluent LGBT circle in Beverly Hills. Yet beneath those smiling faces, something had been rotting. Before Miguel could explain, the clicking of expensive shoes approached from the hallway. Charles Thompson appeared in the doorway, crystal wine glass in hand, his perfect smile faltering at the sight of his husband. Charles' voice carried practiced surprise. "You weren't supposed to be home until tomorrow." Time froze as James looked between his bound employee and his immaculately dressed husband. The perfect facade of their life, the charity galas, the magazine features on successful gay entrepreneurs, the envy of their social circle, all of it cracked like thin ice beneath his feet. What darkness had been living in his home while he built his tech empire elsewhere? What cruelty had been hiding behind designer suits and charitable donations? If you're feeling the tension rising in this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to Heart Stories for more powerful narratives that remind us appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most beautiful mansions hide the ugliest truths. The privilege of wealth never excuses the abuse of power, and James was about to learn this lesson in the most painful way possible. Miguel's story unraveled like a tightly wound spool of thread, each revelation more painful than the last. His 8-year-old son, Mateo, lay in a specialized unit at UCLA Medical Center, fighting a rare pulmonary condition that required experimental treatment. The basic insurance Miguel received barely covered standard checkups, let alone the specialized surgery that could save his son's life. "I only asked for 3 hours," Miguel explained, his voice breaking as James gently untied his wrists. "Just 3 hours to see my son before he did his procedure." The angry red marks told a story of struggle and suffering that no paycheck could justify. James's mind drifted to 7 years earlier, to the San Francisco charity auction where he'd first met Charles. Back then, Charles had captivated him with passionate speeches about equality and compassionate capitalism. They had fallen in love amid champagne flutes and promises of changing the world together. The irony tasted bitter on James' tongue, how that same man could now bind another human being for wanting to visit his dying child. As Miguel spoke, James' phone buzzed with a hospital notification. Somehow Charles had gained access to Miguel's phone and rerouted the alerts. The message was clear: Mateo's condition had deteriorated. Emergency procedures were underway. Miguel's body shook with silent sobs as James showed him the screen. "He knew," Miguel whispered. "He saw the message first and still—" His voice trailed off, unable to complete the thought. The twins stirred against Miguel's chest, their innocent faces peaceful despite the turmoil surrounding them. They had been born through a complicated surrogacy arrangement, an egg donor, a surrogate, legal battles, and nearly $500,000. Charles had orchestrated everything, managing the household while James expanded his tech company. "When did it start?" James asked, his throat tight. "The day you promoted him to manage your family foundation," Miguel replied. He fired the entire staff within a week, said they were stealing. I only got the job because your friend Julia insisted. She said I was her cousin's best friend from Ecuador. She didn't tell you, but we actually met years ago when you sponsored my medical school scholarship before I had to drop out. James felt the floor shift beneath him. Charles had gradually isolated him from friends and family, controlled the household finances despite James's wealth, and cultivated their image as the perfect couple in Beverly Hills' elite LGBT community, all while systematically abusing his power over those beneath him. Outside the nursery window, the California sunset painted the hills gold, the same color as the prison James had unknowingly built around himself. The same color as the cage Miguel and others had been trapped in while serving his picture-perfect family. We often build our lives on foundations we never fully inspect, trusting those closest to us to share our values and humanity. Yet power corrupts silently, turning love into control and privilege into cruelty when left unchecked. James was beginning to understand that the price of his success had been paid by others in currencies far more precious than money. What the hell is going on here? James demanded, positioning himself between Miguel and Charles. The room's temperature seemed to drop as Charles casually swirled his wine, the vintage Cabernet worth more than Miguel's weekly salary. I caught him trying to abandon our children, Charles replied with practiced smoothness. He's been increasingly unreliable, talking about this supposed sick child, asking for advances, disappearing during shifts. I simply ensured he couldn't endanger our babies with his negligence. Miguel flinched at the word supposed, but kept his eyes downcast. The twins still clutched protectively against his chest despite his bound wrists. James noticed how instinctively Miguel shielded the infants, even in his own distress, a protective instinct that spoke volumes. He was tied up, Charles, with our children strapped to him. What kind of twisted solution is that? James' voice rose, causing one of the twins to whimper. He immediately softened his tone, years of conditioning to maintain appearances still influencing his reactions. Charles stepped closer, his expensive cologne filling the space between them. You've been gone for weeks, James. You have no idea what I've been dealing with while you play tech mogul. These domestic issues require creative management. Something in Charles' tone sent a chill down James' spine, the same controlling voice he'd begun using when discussing their finances or questioning James's late nights at the office. Somewhere along their journey, the man who had once championed equality had developed a taste for tyranny. James spotted Miguel's phone on the dresser, its screen lighting up with another hospital notification. When he reached for it, Charles moved with surprising speed to intercept him, but James was faster. The message confirmed his fears. Mateo was being prepped for emergency surgery. The timestamp showed it had arrived hours ago. You knew, James whispered, turning to Charles. You knew his son was dying. These people always have some drama, Charles dismissed with a wave. If we catered to every sob story, James cut him off by walking to the corner of the nursery where an air purifier sat innocuously on a shelf. His tech background had always made him suspicious of devices he didn't install himself. With a quick movement, he extracted a tiny camera hidden within its base. What is this? James held up the miniature surveillance device. Charles' perfect composure cracked slightly. Security for the children. In a room where their caretaker changes clothes, where Miguel spends 12 hours a day. James connected his phone to the house's central system, accessing the camera feed. Hours of footage, not just from today, but weeks of recordings, showed Charles's systematic abuse of not just Miguel, but other staff members as well. The truth crashed down like a collapsing ceiling. The man James had married was a stranger wearing familiar skin. The facade had finally shattered, revealing something monstrous beneath the polished surface of their perfect life. We often see what we want to see in those we love, creating myths and ignoring warning signs that would be obvious if displayed by strangers. Trust becomes a blindfold we willingly wear, especially when removing it means facing painful truths about those closest to us. James was finally seeing clearly. Though the clarity brought no comfort, only the searing pain of recognition and the weight of complicity through ignorance. He threatened to report my sister to immigration if I complained. Miguel explained, his voice steadier now that James had freed his wrists. The twins had been placed in their crib, finally sleeping peacefully after the tension in the room had subsided. She's still waiting for her documentation. They would separate her from her children. James scrolled through the camera footage on his tablet. Each clip worse than the last. Charles screaming at the gardener for using the wrong fertilizer. Charles making the previous nanny cry by insulting her intelligence. Charles roughly handling the twins when he thought no one was watching. The evidence painted a portrait of a man drunk on power and control. You never notice because he's careful around you. Miguel continued. He schedules the staff so you only see certain people. Anyone who might speak up mysteriously gets fired for stealing or incompetence. A notification from James' banking app flashed across his screen, another large withdrawal from their joint foundation account. He opened the app with trembling fingers to find a pattern of suspicious transactions dating back months. Money moved from the charity into offshore accounts, investments liquidated in secret. He's been embezzling, James whispered. The financial betrayal somehow feeling like a secondary blow after the human cruelty he'd witnessed. The foundation for LGBT youth. He's been stealing from it. Miguel looked down at his hands. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. I'm not just Julia's cousin's friend. I met you 15 years ago at Boston University. You funded a scholarship program for international students pursuing medicine. I was one of the recipients before my father got sick and I had to return to Ecuador. The memory surfaced slowly, a reception for scholarship students. A young Miguel shaking his hand, dreams of becoming a pediatric surgeon. That was you. But why didn't you say anything when you started working here? Charles made it clear I shouldn't mention our connection. Said you were too busy to be bothered with sentimental stories from the help. Miguel's voice carried no bitterness, only resignation. I needed this job for Mateo's treatments. I couldn't risk it. James's phone rang his attorney. If he reported Charles' financial misconduct, there would be investigations, publicity, potential criminal charges. Their company stock would plummet. The foundation would lose donors. The custody arrangement for the twins would be scrutinized. The perfect life they'd built would crumble entirely. Charles stood in the doorway, his earlier confidence replaced by calculation. Think carefully about what you're doing. James threw for tree. He warned. Remember who has been managing our public image all these years. Remember whose connections built half your client base. You expose me. You expose yourself. James looked between Charles, his husband of 7 years, and Miguel, a man whose dreams he had once helped foster, now reduced to servitude under his own roof. Both paths forward would require sacrifice. Both would change his life forever. Our moral compass is rarely tested in calm waters. It's in the storm of competing loyalties to our families, our values, our public image, and our own conscience that we truly discover who we are. James faced not just the betrayal of his marriage, but the collapse of his identity as a philanthropist and community leader. The question wasn't simply about right and wrong, but about which version of himself he could bear to face in the mirror each morning. James placed his tablet on the nursery table. The evidence of Charles' cruelty and fraud displayed for all to see. With steady hands, he lifted one of the twins from the crib, cradling the child against his chest as he pressed the security button hidden beneath the changing table. "What are you doing?" Charles demanded, panic rising in his voice as the sound of security personnel approaching echoed through the mansion. "What I should have done long ago," James replied, his voice calm despite the storm raging within him. "Protecting the vulnerable people in my home, including our children." The estate security team appeared behind Charles, their expressions professional but concerned. James had never used the panic button before it had been installed as a precaution against external threats. Not the danger that had been living within their walls all along. "Mr. Thompson will be leaving the property," James instructed them. "Please ensure he takes only personal items, nothing from the office, nothing financial, no documents." Charles' face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. This is my house too." "Those are my children. The house is in my name," James replied. "And as for the children, we'll let the courts decide who provides the safer home. I have hours of footage suggesting it isn't you." As Charles was escorted away, his threats echoing down the hallway, James turned to Miguel. "Go to your son. Take my car. I've already called the hospital administrator. All of Mateo's treatments will be covered. I've authorized emergency funds for the experimental procedure." Tears filled Miguel's eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you." "James," he corrected gently, "and don't thank me for basic human decency, especially when I was blind to its absence for so long." After Miguel departed, James sat in the nursery rocking chair, one sleeping twin in each arm. The mansion felt different now, no longer a showcase of success, but a sanctuary requiring reconstruction from its foundation. The coming days would bring legal battles, financial reckonings, and the painful dismantling of a relationship built on lies. 2 weeks later, James hosted a community gathering at the mansion, not the glossy charity galas of before, but an authentic meeting of neighbors, staff, and families from diverse backgrounds across Los Angeles. Miguel attended with Mateo. The boy's color improved after his successful surgery, his smile brightening the room more than any crystal chandelier ever could. The foundation had been restructured, with transparent oversight and a renewed mission to support vulnerable families regardless of background. The twins gurgled happily in a playpen, surrounded by children who weren't there for photo opportunities, but for genuine connection. Sometimes we must lose everything we thought we wanted to find what we truly need, James told the gathered guests. Privilege means nothing if not used to lift others up. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what relationships in your life deserve closer examination? Where might your own blind spots be allowing harm to occur? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Heart Stories for more narratives that challenge us to see beyond appearances and remember our shared humanity. What would you have done in James' position? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay compassionate, stay vigilant, and never stop growing.